I'm Charlotte Loppie. I'm the Director of the Center for Aboriginal Health Research. I just wanted to welcome you all. If you're here for a workshop on decolonizing research, then you're in the right place. If you're here for lunch, you're not going to get much, but I have a small amount for you. So thanks everybody for coming. This is actually comes from the UVic website. We are now living, working, playing, and loving, hopefully. I'm a very grateful visitor from Mi'kmaq territory in Nova Scotia, but I'll go into that in a minute. I also wanted to welcome those of you who haven't been to the First Peoples House before. As you can see, this is a spectacular room, and I'm really grateful for the organizers to have been able to get us into this room. It's not an easy place to get, and so we're really blessed to be here. As I said earlier, we've got chairs in little circles. You'll notice some of them are facing forward. That's just so that if you're sitting there, you can see us now. But eventually, it might be good if we can try to get into as many circles as we can, because we're going to put you to work in small groups. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce my colleague and very dear friend, and she said I could be her friend, so now she can't go back on that, Sherri Pooyak.
Hi, my name is Sherri Pooyak, and I'm a Cree, actually from Saskatchewan, so any of you from Saskatchewan, yay! So I've been living in Victoria, or visiting, as they say on the west coast here, for in total about 6 years. I did my master's at the social work program with, actually Leslie was my supervisor, and then moved back about 4.5 years ago. So I like to start introducing myself not only as a Cree woman, but also where I come from. And the picture on the right is actually my 5-generation family. So the old lady in the middle, as we like to endearingly call our elders, is my 94-year-old grandmother. And then my mom, my sister, my nieces, and my niece, and my great nieces, who the way that we view relationships is, because I have such a strong relationship with my niece, I call them my grandchildren. So if you ever hear me, or I'm chatting with you about my grandchildren, you'll understand that I don't actually have kids, but I see these young ones as my grandchildren. The other picture is, if you can see it, it's kind of an old picture. It's a picture of my late dad, and I taking the ferry. I have no idea how old I was. I don't remember coming out to Vancouver or coming out to the island. I was quite small, like as you can see. So my dad is the person I connect with the strongest to in terms of my Indigenous identity. It's his reserve that I connect the most to. It's him that I think about when I think about myself as an Indigenous woman. And it's the teachings that come from his line of family that I identify strongly with. I also have a Métis background. I don't identify strongly with Métis because I just didn't grow up in that environment. But my grandmother, who you see up there, it speaks fluently Michif, as well as French, as well as English, as well as Cree. So I think I'm pretty excited the fact that she does that, and she has all those. She's multilingual. So that's just about who I am. I am a community-based research manager with the Canadian Aboriginal AIDS Network, and I work in the field of HIV. So a lot of our work comes through work with Aboriginal communities who are impacted, affected, or living with HIV and AIDS. And if you don't know anything about HIV in the Aboriginal community, it's kind of at a staggering, very sad state right now, just in the sense that we have some of the highest rates of HIV in Canada, particularly among our Aboriginal women, and just so it's something that we're very strongly trying to get the word out, trying to get more information around, trying to research more. So a lot of the work that we do is actually community-based research. So we take that decolonizing approach. We try to use Indigenous methodologies as much as possible. and we work with communities across Canada, literally. So it's a big job. So it's always exciting to actually meet and make new connections and get the word out and try to get the HIV, I guess, on the agenda so that people are thinking about it, so that we can get more Aboriginal people engaged and non-Aboriginal people engaged in HIV research. Anything else you want me to say, Jerome?
Yes. Tell us your favorite color.
Yeah. Apparently turquoise today.
Thanks, Sherri. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about myself, introduce myself as an Indigenous woman, and honor my family. These are generations of my family, right from my daughter and her dad, to my sisters, my mom, my parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents. And for me, growing up in Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaq territory, my dad has French ancestry and some Mi'kmaq, my mom has Mi'kmaq and English. I grew up loving the fiddle because that's totally French and Métis as well. Grew up near the water. So for me, living here is almost like being home because I can't live very far from the water. And so you'll see the gifts that we are giving out today are driftwood and shells, because we have no budget for anything else. But I thought, this is I don't know about you, but I've always head down when I'm on the beach to look for little treasures, and I find that small pieces of wood and stones that come from the ocean that have been there for longer than we know, can really help me in terms of either using as a talking stick or as a prayer object. So so hopefully you'll be able to pick something out at the end of the session today that is meaningful to you and take it home and remember us that way. So I'm, as I mentioned earlier, I'm director of the Center for Aboriginal Health Research. If you haven't been there to visit us, you're more than welcome. If you can find us, we're right by the mailroom, somewhere over there. Right across from the big technology center where the RBC is, just outside of the ring on Mackenzie. So I'm also a professor in the School of Public Health and Social Policy. I teach pretty much all of the Indigenous health courses in that program and a huge class in human sexuality. There's like 320 19-year-olds or something in that class. So that's a totally different topic. So we will talk about that today. Yeah, so I'm really grateful to be here, grateful that Leslie and Robina asked me to be involved in all of this. I've been working in Aboriginal health research probably 20 or so years now, and became involved with the Canadian Aboriginal AIDS Network about 15 years ago. My work is all community driven, and that means that I don't pursue my research ideas in community. I wait for community to come and ask me to be involved. And so about 15 years, CAN invited me to be involved in some of the research, and we've had a wonderful research relationship and friendships, because you said so, since then. And so we're like a family, really. Sherri's office is housed in the center, and we've actually just about an hour ago submitted a CIHR grant for $1.5 million to work with HIV-positive Aboriginal women in ceremony and in an arts-based methodology to gather information from them about what health means to them, what gender, what culture means to them in the context of living with HIV. And we're trying to pursue this as an intervention for their health, because in a pilot study that was very similar, all of the women came out saying, this was good medicine for me. So when research is done right, it can actually be healing. What a concept, eh? Who knew? So we don't have to research people to death. We can actually help them research themselves back to life. So I wanted to talk, so the topic today is decolonizing research. Well, for me, I can't really talk about anything unless I understand what it is I'm trying to, deplete. So for me, colonization has been written about, it's been talked about in all kinds of different ways. And we could spend all day just talking about colonization in very broad strokes. This is the sort of textbook definition. So it's a movement of one group of people or more into a place where they didn't previously have any occupancy. They don't accommodate the place where the new place that they arrive, and they end up creating privilege for themselves in that new place. Now, that's the very Coles Notes of colonization. We've often heard the term terris nullis, right? That means land that belongs to no one, right? And that was the sort of fallacy. That was the justification for European explorers, colonizers to come to North America and say, hey, there's nobody here. And then, of course, the Aboriginal people or Indigenous people were like, I think we're standing right here. They were like, nah, you're not here. You're not here. So my, I guess when I'm thinking about colonizing research, it's really about the fallacy of cognito nullis, which is cognito means knowledge. So that is knowledge belonging to no one. So colonizing research is about the assumption that when we gather information, particularly in this case from Indigenous peoples, that knowledge doesn't belong to them, right? That we're creating knowledge. You hear people say that all the time. Research creates knowledge, right? When in fact that knowledge already exists. And if we come in with this assumption, we are going to colonize the knowledge, right? We're going to colonize the process. And so I'm going to switch things over to Sherri now, and she'll talk a little bit about, oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to go over our agenda. Sorry. Don't mind me. It was the grant. It killed me today. It was killer. So this is our agenda. It's circular, yes. I didn't want to use the medicine wheel because of the medicine wheel, but I did want to start off in a good way in terms of an Indigenous process and not a linear process, and say that we're going to start off with our welcome and our introductions. We are going to ask that you introduce yourselves in whatever way feels comfortable for you once you've gotten into your groups, because Leslie told me that the last time they did the whole group introductions, it took up half the time. And I really want you to be able to dig deeply into some of the questions that we're going to talk about today. Once you've had a chance to get into your small groups, and hopefully this is a clipboard notebook group of people, so I'm assuming at least one person has a hard surface, because we totally didn't want to put tables, square rectangular tables, in this space. I really want you close to each other. I want you facing each other so that you can connect in a deeper way. So if one person in the group can offer to use their notebook or clipboard, we've got paper and pens just to write down some of your ideas. We're going to start to, once we finish that process, we're going to make meaning of that together. We're going to talk about what are the key elements that you have come up with in your groups, and how can we understand those in moving forward, right? And then at the end of the day, each group is going to take a particular element that the entire group comes up with while we're talking, and really focus on how can we address or decolonize that particular process or activity or ideology of the research agenda, right? Because this is a huge undertaking. This goes from everything from these ideological, assumptions and paradigms to did we follow proper protocol, right? And so hopefully we can dig into that. I know that all of you have a rich wealth of information that you can draw from. There's lots of us around that work in this area, and so hopefully we can all learn from each other. Sorry about that, Sherri. It was the grant. All right. Thanks.
Okay, so as a newbie in research, when I started my master's, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what exactly was meant by colonizing research. And so really, instead of what was sort of, I don't know, a normal or the way I would do something, I found out it was the complete opposite. So colonizing research is really just, you go into a community, you kind of, or you want to do research, and you just go in and you do it, and then you write a big paper or a big report or a big article after, and you own it, and it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go back to the people you talk to. It doesn't go back to, there's no, return. There's no reciprocity. So it's the idea of you just kind of enter in the research, you go in, you do your thing, and then you leave. Well, what happens to the people that you're doing research with? So that was kind of how I sort of began to understand it. Also, when you're doing that, you become the authority on that subject, not the people that you're working with, as we'll talk about a little bit more with decolonizing approach. But you're the authority. You have control over everything, right? You have control over the tools you're going to use. You have control over the questions you're going to pose. You have control over who you're going to study. You have control over, or, you know, I mean, keeping in mind, this can also be, this was an approach that was often used by government, and I think in some areas it still is. So the community or the people that you're working with don't have any say in how it's done. So historically, the way research was done was, it could be very, and it was, very detrimental to our people, to Indigenous people. We, you know, there's studies that were done where our blood was taken, our, you know, samples were taken from our flesh, things that we consider very, very sacred, or asked questions that were incredibly inappropriate. So you know, you become the expert in this, and the approach was just, it wasn't a good one, and it really, there was a lot of, I'm just trying to read Charlotte's notes here. There was a lot of, you know, pressure, I guess. I think of, when I think of colonizing research, I think of the Inuit people. They have had, I think, more research than anybody that I can, Indigenous people that I can think of. There's so much work that's so much research that has been done on them and continues to be on them. And I say on because a lot of the times they're not engaged. Historically, they weren't engaged at all. So their research, their support, everything is done, you know, by your expert, the person doing the research. This kind of research really stigmatizes and stereotypes. Like I know in HIV, you know, there's a lot of stigma and a lot of stereotyping going on about what's in HIV, and we're really, the work that we're doing is trying to move away from that. Well, that would help. And so we're trying to, you know, instead of it being like, I'm a person that's HIV positive, I would say, you know, like, I'm just a person. So moving that label away from the person. I realize I'm getting into a little bit of the decolonizing part. It perpetuates the problem. So, you know, you get a lot of the, I don't know, drunken Indian kind of view. You get a lot of Aboriginal people who live in poverty, so it kind of perpetuates those things. Or, I don't know, what are some other examples?
Well, it tends to be deficit-focused as well.
Yeah.
Communities don't really want deficit-focused research anymore. We already know what the problems are, but researchers' agendas are about getting funded. And funding means you have to create a problem or you have to emphasize a problem, right? And so the problem just keeps getting reintroduced. So how many people have heard of the OCAP principles? Yeah. So back about 10 or so years ago, maybe 15 or 12, so the National Aboriginal Health Organization, that doesn't exist anymore because their federal funding was cut because they were doing such a great job, but I won't complain. They developed, in consultation with communities, OCAP principles. The acronym stands for Ownership, Control, Access, and Possession. These became sort of the mantra or the foundation upon which a lot of the ethics guidelines were developed by CIHR and subsequently by the Tri-Council Policy group. So what we're trying to suggest here is colonizing researchers, so folks who may or may not be aware that they are colonizing in their approach, think of data as something that they own once they gather it. Right? So this notion of knowledge that belongs to no one until I gather it from you, until you share it from me, and then I own it. I keep it with me, I put it in my institution agrees with me and says, yeah, you have to just, you know, this is yours. I share it with people. I own what I assume doesn't belong to anybody. As Sherri said, colonizing research is really about control, right? So colonizing researchers are actually taking control of a process that really does belong to community, right? In the same way that colonization as a geographic event is, you know, occurs. So folks, you know, take control of this knowledge that they assume doesn't belong to anyone, and they control how that knowledge gets gathered, what meaning is made from that information, and then how do we share that with people, and who deserves to hear it, and how does it deserve to be told, right? Because some people will think, well, a journal article made accessible to community is enough, when in fact we all know that that's not the case. And then finally, possessing the products, right? And so this is about the information itself, about the data itself, right? So not only is it about possessing the actual, what we call data, numbers, transcripts, but it's about ownership of the knowledge itself, right? So Sherri and I could stand up here all day and we could lecture to you about what colonizing research is, but that's not the purpose of this, thank goodness, because we're just two people, and I know that you all have great ideas about, just given the framework that we've hopefully provided, and I know there will be people in your groups who know a lot more about colonization than we do. What I would like to ask you to do is to gather together in as many of these small circles as possible, and if we run out of the circles, perhaps you could sit sort of in a loose circle on the benches, but get together in groups, ask one person who's a clipboard person, a notebook person, likes to write things down, and talk about what you think the elements of colonizing research are. And it can be anything, so brainstorm away, but I'm hoping, if you're comfortable with the idea of a circle format, is that a lot of times in a circle format, Indigenous people start either to the left or the right, however you like to do it, it depends. I think you guys go left, we go right, or you go right.
Sun.
Right. And the Mohawks do it a different way. I can say that because I was married to a Mohawk. He was a troublemaker. But if you could do it in a round-robin fashion, at least to begin with, because a Western approach tends to emphasize or give voice to people who are more likely to want to share their opinions and perspectives, which is awesome, great. But it doesn't always give room for those people who are less assertive in that way. And so if we do sort of a circle format or a round-robin format, then everyone gets a chance to provide their perspective. And we also tend not to, and I'm just saying this as a suggestion, we're decolonizing this space, we tend not to make comments about someone's perspective, someone's opinion. And so questioning people, commenting on what they've said in a less than favorable way is considered quite rude behavior. All of this is that the next group, I'm going to ask each one of you to take a category that you've identified or that's been identified and really focus the discussion on how do we create change within that sort of element or component of the research process, right? And so that's why we're trying to sort of narrow you down. I know it's difficult, and maybe this will be the first of many. So what I'm just going to start here and go around. This group, what categories or category did you discover? So what we were hoping to do now, which was to reduce your workload and to try to get as much as as much as we can from you in this short period of time, not to be the taskmaster, but what I was hoping that we could do in a very consensual, collaborative fashion, now that we're all in our decolonized mindset, is that each group could actually take one of these themes and really tackle it in a discussion about how can we address, not that we're all going to come up with everything we can do, but how can we address this in a real way when we're engaging in research. So just around one of those themes, whether it's power relationships, whether it's structures, institutional structures, and what I'm hoping we can do is each group will identify an area where they would like to focus their next discussion, and hopefully there's not like a whole bunch of people that want to talk about the same thing. Ideally, we would love to have each group discussing something different, but I'm not going to hold you to that because I'm not your mother, right? So, or maybe you just listen to your mother, somebody else that you listen to, which for me was nobody. So yeah, how about if we, how would we do this in a non-linear way? I guess we've started here. Are people comfortable just sort of tackling this and being okay with whatever you end up getting? Okay. So we'll start with this group, and is there an element that you talked about that you would really like to tackle in the next discussion? Do you feel like your discussion was sort of coalescing around one of these things?
Sources of knowledge.
Sources of knowledge. Awesome. Thanks. And I think I heard this group talking about the philosophy of science, right? So I think that's where you guys are, your heads at. So.
We started with
Can you use your longhouse voice?
going as a whole person.
Okay.
So that means being present, kind of mind, body, spirit. Kind of learning to let your guard down, not anchoring yourself to a position as a researcher, but more as a human being who is engaging and interacting with people in a community. So being whole and being present was an important one. And then our other one was investing your time in the community, whether you can do it either before research and outside of the context of research as well, like whether it's volunteering, going to community events, band meetings, helping out with youth programs, so committing yourselves to them.
Great. Thank you.
What we talked about was one was around the notion of community-based research, and particularly how, as the university has talked more and more about community-based research and emphasized it, that there's been less funding available for actual community-based researchers, and so that we're putting most of the resources into the community side of CBR rather than resources to communities to either conduct their own research or participate as equal partners with the university. We also talked about the need to have funding to actually build relationships with community, so that much of the funding requires you to actually have done the process of relationship building before you can access the funding, and we'd like to see some funding available, and also particularly for students, to do that kind of relationship building, including getting to communities, being able to provide gifts to communities around relationship building. And we also talked about the problems with Tri-Council funding timelines and expectations that make it really not conducive to community engaged research.
You know, we were talking about, you know, this subject, and this was before we actually started talking about today's event. And, you know, I've often, for me, metaphors are helpful to understand complex things. And it's almost as though we can't undo what's been done. It's been done. So we're in a new environment now. We're not in a pre-colonial environment. We're not in a totally modern or totally colonized environment. We're in this place where, you know, it's like switching laces on a boot. You know, the lace might not fit properly. You know, it's sort of, we have to sort of unlace the boot, if you will, unlace the structure, and then try to create something new within the environment that we have now. And for me, it really begins with decolonizing ourselves. And that includes Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, because our minds have been, we've been socialized, we've been convinced, and we've reached a consensus about what this world should look like, does look like. One of the group, the second group in the back, the group of young people, no offense to anybody who's not young, but they all look very young to me. So I'm getting close to 60, so I'm like, no, you all look pretty young to me. They were talking, what the hell was I saying? What were you saying? Yeah. Oh, right. Just about how do we I can't remember. What were you guys saying? Anyway, so for me, you know, I do a lot of work in cultural safety, and cultural safety in healthcare used to mean let's be sensitive to the other people. Let's create, like, let's put some beads and feathers on the wall and make Indigenous people feel comfortable. And what we've come to understand is that creating an environment of cultural safety, or creating a decolonized, which is also, it's a new environment that is trying to create some safety, because colonization is a destructive force, right? It's the imposition of a person or a group's ways on another group. But if we don't decolonize our own minds and the way we think about the world, and what we recognize has happened, and how we, oh, I remember Ben was saying, you were saying, you know, when you asked the folks that you were working with, well, why do we do it this way? The response was, well, that's the way it's always been done. And I said, yeah, that's the way it's been done since 1492. But that doesn't mean that's the way we keep doing it. But in creating those sort of environments of safety, we really start with ourselves. Now, we can talk about changing structures, you know, funding, but I think, you know, and not to say that this is the first thing, but the relationship between the individual researcher and the folks whose stories are being shared with that person. I mean, that's like, you know, giving someone something that is very valuable to you, your family, your community, your culture, your nation. To take that and receive it as a gift and really start from that perspective, I think goes a long way in ensuring that we will try to sort of relace the boot in a different way. Right. So I wanted to give people an opportunity. Where are we at? I guess we're right at 2 o'clock. I'm sorry that we can't do a closing circle. This 2 hours is a very short period of time, but I do hope if you're willing to share your notes with us, that would be amazing, because we'd like to write them up in some sort of a report for the day. This is really a beginning. I mean, people have been and will continue to talk about this, but I really do appreciate it, and I consider it a gift that you all put so much of yourselves into these discussions, that you are willing to be vulnerable. And I know sometimes it's a little bit of a difficult and discomforting thing to talk about, but I really saw a lot of love and a lot of generosity in the groups, and so I really want to say how much I appreciate that. I hope you take your stones and shells and remember us. I gather them and using them for talking sticks sometimes, or if you just put it somewhere, someday you'll find it and say, oh, that's that Charlotte, what was she doing? She's probably gone now. She was very old when we saw her last. But I just want to say, really, I want to say from my heart that I really appreciate it. It was lovely to meet you all, and I really appreciate the hard work that you put in today, and I just want to give Sherri an opportunity to say goodbye as well.
Yeah, so just wanted to say thank you for coming, and for the conversations I was a part of It's so rewarding to hear a decolonizing approach being known, talked about. It was the conversations I was in, it was hard for everybody to talk about colonizing, which is great because that means that we've moved forward and we're recognizing that ways of knowing are not, I'm an expert, therefore I know everything. I can only tell you where I know and where I come from, but it was so nice to hear hear everybody's input and discussion being given here. And for Charlotte, always asking me to come and help with things because it's such an honor. We have a very loving relationship, Charlotte and I. Just thank you again for coming and being part of this.